So my talk today is about business models in the agentic AI era. I'm sorry. And to get us started, I want to ask a quick question. So, in your opinion, will AI be the biggest opportunity of our time? Can you please raise your hand? 20%, no, 30% maybe. All right. Will it be the biggest bubble we've ever seen? Okay, I see. I saw a double count here, but that's okay. All right, maybe it's somewhere between. Who knows, right? Cool. So my point is, the answer is that this is exactly the wrong question, right? Why is this the case? Because AI is only getting cheaper, better, and faster, and this is the case every single day, right? So if you think about it, AI is now deeply embedded in our daily lives, right? I just have here my smartphone, right? If you have an Android, you probably have some Google and Gemini integration, so that's quite strong. Maybe Apple Intelligence is not there yet, but maybe they make it one day, right? But the point is, it's deeper and deeper integrated, right? Then we have a clear trend in the investment area. So investments are increasing. Usage is also increasing in general. There's also a clear trend in the model performance. So models are just becoming better every day. Benchmarks are improving. It's a bit a nuanced picture for the reasoning models, but still, I'm very bullish there still. We have falling hardware costs. So this is all fueling this trend. And just if you look into the inference costs, like how drastically that decreased over time, there's a clear trend and it will only become cheaper over time, right? And then in addition to that, there's a strong supply of strong models, especially from the US, but also from China. If you think about open source models like Qwen and DeepSeek, these are really state-of-the-art and very performant, and they are like available to everyone, right? In theory, you can just run them on your own, make a business out of it. So question is what you do about this, right? Because this is just a fact. And what I find very interesting is that although there are so many opportunities right now, a lot of companies struggle very, very hardly with AI, right? So 80 to 95% report really no impact, right? And there's something that has been now called the Gen AI paradox, where you think about basically two classes of use cases, right? One class is like a horizontal use case. So this is something like ChatGPT, Copilot. So these applications that can go very broad, but not very deep, right? So they scale well, but it's very hard also to measure value. I think all of us probably know it's very hard to measure like how much value did Gemini now bring in your organization? No one can really measure that, right? On the other hand, you have the vertical use cases. So these are very function-specific, vertical, industry-specific, right? There's a lot of value in those, but these are all also very hard usually to leverage due to a number of problems. But what we see here is also that these are mostly stuck in pilot, right? So getting them to production is really, really hard. And now agentic AI is a bit the new kid on the block, right? So it's a new opportunity that may help us now to get out or to break out of the Gen AI paradox. Maybe I start with a quick definition and maybe a quick definition of what agents are not, right? So agents are not a set of prompts. Agents is also not tool calling or MCP or any related technology. It's not necessarily reasoning models, it's not programmatic loops, and it's also not a process automation, right? Although all of these things are characteristics of agents. Now let's do a quick definition. It's not scientific, to be honest, right? There's no clear definition, but in principle, I want to get you the idea. So what is an agent? It's basically a system that uses reasoning and planning to solve complex multi-step problems, right? And it uses also tools and memory. So that's a bit of a technical description. There are also like a lot of patterns and so on. I won't go into that today. I think that's not of interest for us. In order to understand that a bit better, and this is the most technical thing I will show for today, so bear with me. So it's important to understand the sort of like importance of an augmented LLM, as it is like the foundation for an AI agent. And what is an augmented LLM? It's basically a strong LLM, mostly a reasoning model, because you need reasoning capabilities, right? But then it also needs to have certain capabilities. So one of the capabilities is that it can do retrieval. The other one is that can do tool calling. And the third one is that it can retain memory. And all of this is important because an agent, after all, and this is what you see on the right-hand side, is a system that needs to act and also interact with the environment, right? It needs to be able to take decisions, to dynamically take information, and then, as I said, take a decision, right? Now, the big question is, how will AI agents impact business models, which is the heart of my talk today. Before I go deeper, I'll give a quick introduction because I didn't do so. So I'm currently head of product management at Aleph Alpha. We are into B2B enterprise Gen AI. I helped build and scale the product organization after our quite large round that we raised end of 2023. And I'm in general very passionate about like deep tech and AI and ML. I've mostly done platform products so far. So let's get back to our question about AI agents and business models. And today I really want to make it super easy, not super complex, like, I don't know, business model canvas or anything like that, really make it more easy. And I just want to look into two questions, right? So that you also see how easy it can be to think about how to apply AI agents, right? First question is like, what kind of work are you doing? And the second question is, where does this work apply, or where do you do this work, right? And in order to make it even a bit more simpler, I came up with a little framework, so I even gave it a name. So it's called the Agentic 4 Moves matrix. So just in case you need a little reminder, but it's like same simple idea, right? We have two dimensions, what and where. And if you think about it, right, where do you apply your work? I mean, it is mostly either internally or it's externally, right? Internally is in order to enable your organization, for example. Externally is definitely something product focusing and customer focusing, right? And then the what, of course, we do more than optimize and innovate, but ideally we do optimization and innovation, right? So, and now we see that this is a little matrix, and we have now 4 quadrants, and we can walk through all of the quadrants. Now we'll give you like a little nudge, ideally, that has also a little take-home message for you, right? So first thing is optimize internally. That's the first quadrant to start with. I think it's a pretty straightforward one, right? We all know this. It's all about cost savings, time savings, like getting rid of some problems. I don't know, Gemini or so would be an example. You would like try to introduce that, and then it may help you or it may not help you, right? But then there's, of course, also like an opportunity for like internal developments. And again, question is always, in this case, in my opinion, like how do you go from AI pilot to something that is really P&L relevant, which should be your goal, right? Yeah, a little sequence of how that usually goes, right? Looks quite fancy in the beginning, but then it just blows off. And this is actually what happens to most pilots. As I also mentioned earlier with the stats, 80 to 95% really fail, right? And in order to like not fail, you really need to understand why people most of the time fails. And I just like brought in my like top 6 failure modes or so that I've seen so far. Besides product, I also did service teams for quite some time. So I had a couple of use cases that I saw here. And I mean, if you think about it, right, I start with a 10% not 10x trap, right? This is usually, for me, a symptom. You just pick like a not big enough problem that you want to solve, right? And then what happens is you maybe solve it or maybe not solve it, but usually at one point you run out of time, run out of money, run out of executive support. It's over. Then the unit economics trap. I think that's a pretty interesting one for Gen AI because not a lot of people really understand the economics of tokens and of AI in general. So it's super easy to, I don't know, get your API, do some calling, right? But then doing a proper business case around that is not always easy, especially if you go in the direction of self-hosting. That may be interesting depending on the size of your organization, right? Then prototype to production trap. I think that's a straightforward one. I mentioned that earlier. Solution without a problem trap. I think, hey, PMs, I think we should prevent that ideally, but not always the case, right? So especially with AI, there's a lot of hype. So let's take AI and try to find a problem to retrofit it. That's usually also one of the root causes. Users don't accept mediocrity. I think that's a very important one. And I discovered that, I would say recently in the B2B context, we as users are now so used to like great B2C products, right? That we expect the same in the B2B area, especially in internal products, right? So if you launch something internally, if you're a large organization, all your users, they all know ChatGPT, right? They all know Gemini. So they expect like the same thing. And that's hard. That can be really hard, right? Because you need to be then as good or identify like the most important value drivers and then deliver on those, right? And the last one is maintenance and the ongoing cost trap. Classic, right? It's project thinking. So you start with something, you get like your budget, you launch it, and then, oh, there, I need people, I need infrastructure, I don't know, to pay the bills, right? So not everyone is thinking about that as well. Or probably thinking about it but ignoring it. Okay, let's move to the second quadrant. We are still in the internal domain, right? So we look internally, but now we want to innovate. And I like to think a lot about innovation internally as a strategy question, right? Because if you think about it, optimization, okay, that's needed. It's a bit boring, right? But how can you innovate really internally? Can set the stage for future products, future like go-to-market, future success in the outside, right? So for me, the question becomes, okay, how can I out-strategize the competition? Here I brought a little example from what Anthropic published on their blog, which I find is a quite cool inspiration for all of us, right? So what you have is like a multi-agent research system. This is what they built, right? So the idea is like a multi-agent system. Earlier I talked about agents, right? But the cool thing about agents, you can have many of those and basically they can work together to accomplish even more complex tasks, right? So usually you have some sort of an orchestrator agent and then you have like specific specialized agent and then they basically do all their planning and their work and then they get some stuff done, right? And if you plug that into a UI, like in a chat UI, for example, you have an interactive system and then suddenly you have a team that consists of agents, right? Now, what's the relationship to the strategy? I think it's just pretty straightforward and you can probably apply to any function, right? You can just come up with those systems for the most pressing problems that you have and you can just build them, right? So, and the cool thing is you can fully automate them. So doing market research, for example, you can do competitor analysis, investment trends, technology trends, whatever you want. You can just plug it all in. You can then do automatic report generation and so on. So that can give you a huge edge, right? If the competition doesn't do it. It's also no guarantee, right? But it could be like a tool in your toolbox. Okay, now let's look externally. And here we start with the optimization. How do you optimize your sort of like customer-facing operations? And for me, that has a lot to do with then sales and marketing, of course. And here, I believe it's quite interesting to look into how do you separate signal from noise, actually. Because, I mean, we all are probably on LinkedIn, right? There's a zillion people like, hey, here is my, I don't know, 10x, like customer acquisition system, lead gen, I don't know, conversion, whatever. And we may then dismiss this, right? And of course we dismiss it because it's sometimes like just annoying. But there's a lot of opportunity and I just wanted to also bring another real world example here. So probably you heard of the company Cognigy. So that's a German company, super successful in customer support and AI automated sort of like workflows. They just recently got acquired for almost like $1 billion. So proving that they've done a good work. I know one of the founders, so pretty smart guys. And yeah, agents nowadays can just like automate entire call centers, right? I mean, not long ago, you had to have like a call center with 200, 300 people, I don't know, depending on your size of your company. And nowadays, you just have agents doing that, right? And they have voice capabilities, so you can't recognize that well. They have like chat capabilities. They have like a human-like interaction feeling, right? So they are programmed to just sound like a human. It's all personalized, right? So they know about you, they know about your history, your purchasing, whatever is the case. And then they can even trigger like next steps, right? And then this is still just the beginning of all of this. So I think Customer experience, of course, is something, but it's the same for sales and marketing to varying degrees, right? You probably all know content generation, marketing campaigns, all of this can be automated with very high efficiency already. By the way, sales and marketing is also one of the most like applied verticals where Gen AI and agents are also now being implemented because it's pretty straightforward, I would say. And then sales, of course, you think about lead qualification and these kind of topics, right, where you can also have huge assistants nowadays. All right, let's get to the last quadrant, probably the most exciting one for all of the product folks in here, right? How do you now build your agentic advantage? So how do you now innovate externally? So how do you innovate go-to-market? How do you innovate product? How do you innovate like a cool customer experience, right? And I think just to make the point, right, I could like go really crazy deep here, but I wanted to take a very simple example just to drive home the point. I had to plan my trip recently to Berlin, right? And I think by just this example, you will very quickly realize how powerful agents can be, right? Because I had to do all those steps, right? I had to go like to plan for a hotel, right? So I had to go to the travel websites, check the dates, check the availability, check the prices, do the booking, right? Then I had to check for the train. Same thing, go to Deutsche Bahn app, right? Put in the dates again. Check availability, schedules, so on, costs. Yeah, same thing, right? Weather, right? I mean, it can rain, it can be cold in Berlin, especially. So I need to look like, how will I dress for this? Which brings me also to clothes, because I had to go to work yesterday, today to the conference. What's a good conference attire? I don't know. Black seems to be quite in fashion here in Berlin. Today I came more like in blue. That's okay, right? Food. Maybe I want to lose some weight. Need to find a good restaurant. Want to get maybe to a bar with my colleagues or conference attendees. Family. Don't forget to call the kids for going to bed, right? Also very important. And then maybe I have some time for wellness. I don't know. Maybe there's a gym around here or so, right? Okay. I mean, you get that, right? Why should I do this if there are agents nowadays, right? No, but I mean, with an agent, I just like go to my smartphone. I'm like, hey, I'm having this conference. It's this date in Berlin. I don't know. It's check out the weather. I need the clothes. I don't know. Do me the booking. Here's the budget. See you later, right? Done. It's like a 5-minute like job, right? And I'd probably spend 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't know. I'm already experienced, maybe less. But you get the point, right? And it's a super like straightforward example. And this is also why I believe that agents, or why there's a high chance that agents will disrupt SaaS, right? Because there will be a clear trend, in my opinion, from going to app and solution basically centered to more like an outcome centered basically delivery mode, right? And then it's all about outcome orchestration, right? Because agents are ultimately orchestrators who orchestrate outcomes for your users, right? Not sure how I'm doing on time. Maybe I'm a bit too fast. I don't. Okay, because I'm wrapping it up now. Then we have tons of time for a question, which is usually my favorite part of the talk. So here are my 5 steps for you, just to remember how to future-proof your product and business in the agentic AI. So first thing, and I know it's not always easy for many of us, face reality. You need to understand what are the risks, what are also the opportunities, right? It will depend also on your industry. I feel some industries are very heavily at risk, so maybe it's a bit more an uncooler conversation, but still it's important to be really transparent about it. Next topic, PMs should know this, obsess over outcomes, right? This is what everyone tells, but I feel it will become more and more important because value delivery will move towards end-to-end outcome delivery, right? So it's not enough anymore to just provide like a thin slice. You need to think much broader. Build the bench, right? Like where do you get that talent from? These cool AI engineers, the AI leaders, right? They're not like lingering around or growing on trees, especially not in Germany. So you need to also plan your investment, plan your talent strategy. That's super important. Nail the economics. That was what I mentioned also earlier. Token economics is not straightforward, and also outcome-based pricing. A lot of people talk about it, but then you really need to understand when can you apply outcome-based pricing. And this is, I mean, only the case if you can clearly attribute actions to outcomes, right? Otherwise, there's no way that you can, I mean, you can dream of outcome-based pricing, but it will never fly in the market, right? So the big question for us will be, how do we clearly attribute outcomes to the use of our product or the service, whatever you provide, right? And then last one is like think laterally. Since we need to move beyond like thin slices, the question will be, okay, like what will my customer also want, right? Like if my customer needs my product, like what are the other things? I think there's also this concept of in product marketing, forgot about it, something like super consumers or something like that, right? So you like one thing, and then there's a high probability that you like also other things. So you probably need to then think about then other parts of the market that you need to address. So that also means your competition is then growing, because it's not only your classical competition, but it may be just companies that you never think about, right? Maybe the weather app will now replace, I don't know, Deutsche Bahn or so. Maybe they become a better service provider than Deutsche Bahn, who knows, yeah? Yeah, this was then the end of my talk. Thanks a lot for your attention. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. There's a little like a QR code, but you can also just like do it manually.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I think. Yeah, I expect a lot of questions, because I usually bet that the best product managers are the business people, right? Have business mindset. And this session is a lot of business models, and I need to think about it. So let's open the gate for the questions.
Hey, thanks for the talk. It seems that you're kind of trying to say build end-to-end solutions, but it also seems that like these orchestration layers, they would have to orchestrate something. There will be some specialized units inside those systems that would also someone would have to build.
So I don't agree fully with your first part, because I didn't say you should do that. I just gave a couple of options about the things you could do, right? And this is like one of the things that I and many others see on the horizon. So I think there is a chance, but it also like maybe not the case, right? So, but you need to be prepared. To your second question, I think orchestration is a very important question, also technically, right? Because it will all boil down to who will own the orchestration layer at the end of the day, right? And I believe there will be, as with all sort of like technology developments, there will be a race. There will be maybe one or two winners at the end who will then own this, right? And we already see that large companies like Google, they invest very heavily into also like agent protocols. They also launched their agentic platforms, right? And I think everyone is trying to figure out how can you like get part of that, right? Because eventually there all the transactions will happen. If you all own that, then I think you're in the winning team actually, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. That was great. My question is more about on the pricing side. So first of all, of course, as a customer, you mentioned I want also to have that agentic app in my pocket to just do all the things for me. But I'm curious, because as you said, there are multiple steps, and the pricing, as much as we want the product to be outcome based, but the pricing is another dimension, which is there are a lot of steps that agent need to go through and flow ultimately to give you a plan that ultimately is not cheap, of course.
Yes.
So what are some of the challenges that you see, as much as we want outcome based, what are some of the challenges that you see in the pricing side of the AI product?
Yes, I love the question. Thank you so much. So first one is, I wouldn't recommend anyone just going for outcome-based pricing, because it's probably the hardest pricing you can nail. And this is why I emphasized earlier, you can only do outcome-based pricing if you have some attribution capability, right? If you cannot say that this outcome is clearly related to this action, there's no way you can price that, right? Second thing is, of course, you need to understand what is then the value of this, which is also not always straightforward, right? But then coming back to the other part of your question, so I see a huge still unaddressed problem, and a lot of like, this is a bit more an engineering topic, to be honest, right? Or more technology topic about like risks and security about agents. So probably you have seen like agents going rogue and like deleting databases because they got, I don't know, root access on some systems. I mean, it's really important that we understand how to like put proper guardrails in place, how do you put like security measures in place further drive security and standardization. There was like earlier, unfortunately I don't have that slide anymore in the deck, but there was like from an IT security researcher, they called it the lethal trifecta basically, right? There are 3 factors that contribute to very potentially catastrophic outcomes. I can't remember all of them, but it's essentially they have access to systems, right? They can like call information out of the outside world, so just do internet calls and then I don't know, download malicious software or something like that, and they can execute that then on the behalf of someone, right? So that's a huge like potential risk, and I feel that it needs to be properly addressed because that could eventually just be also like a factor that will prevent customers, right? Because customers will only trust these systems if they are trustworthy, right? And this is still not fully addressed in my opinion. So although I'm bullish about the opportunity, I wouldn't use it at the moment in time, just personally, but I'm also more conservative here.
Okay, there is a follow-up and then we go here. 1 second.
Yeah, I actually also had a
1 second.
Yeah, for the second one, I think one practice that I saw and was pretty interesting was you actually give budget as a token to the agent for every task or outcome that you want them to perform. So if they are overburning the token, they're out of market, they can't work anymore. And that was interesting.
No, that's super interesting. Yeah, how do you apply economic principles basically to then agents? How do you incentivize them? Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, I also had the question about alternative pricing models to the outcome-based. So I'll rest my case.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, let me stand up. Hi, once again, great speech. And that's also a great opportunity to ask the question to the Aleph Alpha in this case. So you work with the big enterprises and also helping them to scale in the AI system. Really interesting to see some tactical points or some recommendations after you creating this AI-based agent products for the enterprise customers. What are the things that you stay on top of reducing the implementation time for them so that the projects don't go on and on and on? So what are the advices and recommendations you can really provide as a tactical points?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's always like, so for me, first thing I think about is basically make versus buy. So first, okay, pilot to product, right? Like it's okay to have pilots because sometimes you just have to have them in order to also demonstrate the value, because it's not always straightforward to demonstrate the value if you don't know whether something works or not, right? So I think that's the first point that you need to have. So once you have a use case where there's like value and demonstrated, and you also understand, okay, there's like a larger upside, then it will become at one point like a make or buy decision, right? I mean, do you really want to build such a system and own and operate it, right? Which is probably more interesting for larger customers. Like think about big banks, for example, right? Or big industrial companies or big automotive companies. I mean, they can justify the spend to some degree, not always, right? And the other question is then, okay, like how do you move forward then with the potential buy decision? And buying, this is like also my experience from the past, always boils down to how much do you then trust the vendor, especially if this is becoming really central to your operations and to your systems, right? How much will how much do you want to become dependent on some third party, right? All these factors will determine your approach, but there's no straightforward answer. It will always depend on a case by case, like what's your strategy, your appetite for some risk or some partnerships. Some companies really prefer like do it on their own. Some like go all in partnerships. Some are in between. That's also then a changing trend, you know. So it's not very easy to answer.
I would like to understand how you see the future from the strategy perspective for companies who are building AI products, and then they have that dependency to LLM providers such as OpenAI. So how do you see this like power dynamics in future in terms of dependency on their LLM solutions? Or do you think that there will be like open source solutions that will be sufficient for most of the companies?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think the dependency to providers is actually there, right? I mean, if your entire product and business model is depending on an API that you don't control, I mean, there's just a risk, right? I mean, there are political risks, there are economic risks. So political risk could be like some administration just decides, hey, we shut down this API for, I don't know, people in this country, right? You're done. Economic risk is you have no control over price and costs actually, right? And then there's also like a risk in terms of like data, right? The data that you transfer, you don't know exactly how it is processed, right? I mean, although we have like nice agreements on paper, we all know politics and international law may be different. So it will depend on your use case. I'm a big advocate of like you try to own and understand as much as possible of this, but I'm also aware of that this comes at a large cost, right? Because so our company is now like operating some of these models, and that's like a substantial like infrastructure costs that you have to justify. You have then people costs. Also, I'm not aware of that there are so many people who can run those systems in Germany. I'm not sure whether there are like 50 people or 100 people who can properly run like an inference service, right? Like I don't know. So it could be, but I don't know, right? I don't believe it, to be honest. So and this is all like cases where either there's an opportunity now for a player, for example, in the market who says, hey, I want to like provide something like that because there may be a market gap, or it's something where a company can just try to invest. I mean, you can also just look at the curves, how costs are dropping, how basically technology is improving, and you can then also sort of calculate or predict like at what moment in time it may be just so feasible for you to run it, right? It's also just a matter of time sometimes. Also, then services become available, something like also open source, right? So you have open source models, but you can also have open source inferencing nowadays. So it's also about gathering a team about this, like exciting it, and trying to make it work for your business will be the thing that is the most important, yeah.
I have a fairly simple question, I would say, like compared to the other ones. You said you have a strong opinion about AI agents killing SaaS. What is the nuance here? Like, which type of SaaS do you think should not exist anymore in the era of agentic AI, and which ones will still make it?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Maybe I should have put a big disclaimer on that. I had to like put a bit like a controversial slide on my talk. So I think reality is usually more nuanced, right? I think in general, you can look today at what are the success rates of Gen AI applications, right? And as I mentioned earlier, for example, sales and marketing and these kind of functions, there is a larger adoption because it's easier to get in there, right? So I think it's pretty straightforward to then assume if you can easily enter something that this thing is just at a higher risk at the moment, right? I think if we look into a very different extreme, I don't know, I worked for a large industrial company here. I would assume now large industrials aren't that much like affected because you still have to have sort of like large operations, manufacturing, I don't know, raw materials, these kind of things. So that is not easily disrupted by agentic AI, right? So I could see that it will be very much like vertical dependent, probably like these B2C examples, like what I mentioned now for my trip, right? I mean, there were a bunch of like SaaS solutions involved, and I could see that at one point an agent take over. Maybe we also don't want that, right? Because maybe we don't want that Google will take over all of this, because then you have this sort of monopoly where like one company has so much insight about you and so much control and power about you. That you don't want that as a customer, right? So there can be many different ways how this plays out. So it's hard to predict. But I would say just look at where application is high today. That's a good indicator. And then from there on, you can move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your talk. So I think one of the first slides really resonated with me, where you have the kind of shallow, generic, horizontal use cases, which are easier to implement and scale, but not high value. And you have the vertical use cases, which are high value, but very difficult to do. Maybe you can share some of your experiences where LLMs and agents specifically gave you a good outcome for a vertical use case, especially if it was not super typical like voice or text, but more of maybe something that's normally not so much in the realm of LLMs right now.
Just thinking about like, I think I cannot disclose too much of our internal things that we do.
Good answer.
Yeah. maybe I try to give some guideline in terms of the horizontal versus vertical, which is based on my experience. So as I mentioned earlier, people are really used to horizontal products right now, and they expect this quality. And a lot of vertical solutions, as you may imagine, will have some sort of like characteristic of a horizontal solution. So just as an example, right, imagine you want to do some Gen AI for taxes. I'm just making this up, right? So, I mean, it's taxes, right? It's a domain. Maybe there are probably a zillion problems that are very complicated. But maybe there will be just a chat UI that you will put on top of that problem, right? So then your UI suddenly will become the benchmark, right? And then if you think about it, a lot of like things that are related to the UI are very much related also to the model and to inference, right? And then people will suddenly have this expectation on how a model performs, right? And this gets very interesting for regulated industries like financial industries, as an example, tax topics, also for the government, right? Because where do you get the inference from? And there the problem then starts, right? Because then you're like, yeah, sure, we can provide you with the inference, like do it your own, but then suddenly the company needs to provide, I don't know, 8 H100 like NVIDIA GPUs, and then they are at 30,000 euro cost per month, right? Where they didn't demonstrate any value yet, right? And then you have like a whole sort of problem that you have to basically solve. Which is then also about, okay, you will find this, but how many other use cases do you have to then justify these investment costs? So these are some observations I made.
Hayder, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank
This
you
was
also.
amazing.